March 8, 1945. 21st Bomber Command Headquarters, Guam. The target folders lay spread across the plotting table. A cigar glowed in the darkness as Major General Curtis LeMay studied reconnaissance photographs of Tokyo's manufacturing districts. Thousands of small factories scattered throughout residential neighborhoods, machine shops in wooden buildings, parts manufacturers operating from converted homes. The entire war machinery of the Japanese Empire dispersed across cities built from wood and paper. Message from reconnaissance flight over Tokyo. Cloud cover minimal. Wind conditions favorable. Target districts confirmed densely populated with cottage workshops. LeMay set down his coffee and reached for the operations telephone. 334 B-29 Superfortresses would launch within hours from airfields across Guam, Saipan and Tinian. What none of them knew was that this single tactical decision would trigger the most devastating firebombing campaign in human history. The Pacific War had taught American forces that Japanese manufacturing was not concentrated in massive facilities like Detroit or Pittsburgh. It was scattered, dispersed, hidden among civilian populations. Cut those supply lines and the entire Japanese war machine would grind to a halt. The Japanese manufacturing system had evolved through decades of development into a unique structure. Over 50% of Tokyo's war output came from small workshops employing fewer than 30 workers. Subcontractors producing aircraft parts in residential districts, metal fabrication in backyard shops, precision instruments assembled in converted temples. The Mitsubishi Aircraft Works alone relied on over 300 separate suppliers scattered throughout the Tokyo metropolitan area. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress represented the pinnacle of American aviation technology. Each aircraft displaced 20 tons empty, powered by 4 Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone radial engines producing 2,200 horsepower each. Major General Curtis LeMay stood before the mission briefing board studying weather patterns over the Japanese home islands. His command included 345 operational B-29s spread across airfields on Guam, Saipan and Tinian. Each bomber carried a crew of 11 men and could deliver 20,000 pounds of ordnance to targets 1,500 miles away. The B-29 represented the most expensive weapons program of World War II. $3.7 billion invested in an aircraft that could fly higher, faster, and farther than any bomber in history. Unlike the precision daylight bombing that had devastated German facilities, the equations of attacking Japan were fundamentally different. High-altitude bombing achieved hit rates of less than 5% due to the jet stream winds discovered over Japan that could exceed 250 miles per hour at bombing altitude. Captain Robert McNamara had studied those statistics as part of the Army Air Force's Office of Statistical Control. Harvard-educated with a mind for operations research and efficiency analysis, McNamara understood that strategic bombing was ultimately about calculations, tons of ordnance delivered per sortie, target elimination percentages, cost per square mile of manufacturing capability neutralized. The difference between victory and stalemate often came down to payload efficiency and target selection methodology. Aboard the Japanese Planning Committee in Tokyo, Control Officer Ginjiro Fujiwara reviewed manufacturing dispersal reports. Following the Doolittle Raid of 1942, Japanese authorities had ordered critical war assembly scattered throughout urban areas. Aircraft engine components manufactured in Asakusa district. Electrical systems produced in Fukagawa. Ball bearings fabricated in Sumida Ward. Each district containing hundreds of small workshops integrated into residential neighborhoods, specifically to avoid concentrated bombing attacks. The strategy had worked against high-altitude precision bombing. American B-29s flying at 30,000 feet struggled to hit even large factory complexes. But Fujiwara's greatest fear was fire. Tokyo had burned before. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 had demonstrated the vulnerability of Japanese cities to conflagration. Now, with American bombers overhead almost daily, the nightmare scenario was becoming increasingly probable. The American strategic bombing campaign had achieved minimal results through February 1945. 21 Bomber Command had flown 22 missions against Japanese targets since November 1944. Results were catastrophically poor. The Nakajima aircraft engine plant at Musashino had been attacked 7 times. Total damage, less than 4% of the facility neutralized. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, had invested his reputation and the future of an independent air force on the B-29 program. Political pressure mounted daily. Congress questioned the billions spent on superfortresses that couldn't hit their targets. The Navy argued that carrier aviation was more effective than strategic bombing. The Army prepared for invasion, convinced that airpower alone could never force Japanese surrender. Intelligence officer Lieutenant Colonel Robert Olds had compiled target analyses that revealed the fundamental problem. Japanese weather patterns created unique challenges. Constant cloud cover obscured targets. The jet stream scattered bombs miles from aim points. Japanese fighter interceptors had learned to exploit the B-29's vulnerable moments during bomb runs. Loss rates approached 6% per mission, unsustainable for long-term operations. At 17:35 on March 9th, the first B-29 lifted off from Northfield, Guam. Unlike previous missions, the bomber had been stripped of all defensive armament except the tailguns. Ammunition removed, armor plating pulled out, every pound of weight savings converted to additional incendiary bomb load. LeMay's tactical revolution was breathtaking in its audacity. Night attack instead of day, low altitude instead of high, 5,000 to 9,000 feet instead of 30,000. Incendiary clusters instead of high explosives. The conventional wisdom of strategic bombing inverted completely. Weather forecasts indicated ideal conditions. Surface winds of 28 miles per hour would fan flames across target districts. Low humidity would accelerate fire spread. Clear skies would provide excellent visibility for Pathfinder aircraft. The calculations were devastating. Each B-29 carried 40 clusters of AN-69 incendiary bombs. Each cluster contained 38 individual bomblets filled with napalm gel. Temperature at ignition exceeded 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Burning time approximately 6 minutes. Total incendiary load per aircraft, 6 tons. Multiply by 334 bombers launched. The equation yielded 1,665 tons of incendiaries to be dropped on an area of approximately 12 square miles. Tokyo's fire defences were catastrophically inadequate. 8,000 firefighters for a city of 7 million. 3 ladder trucks capable of reaching above 2 stories. No pressurized water system in most residential districts. Narrow streets that would trap evacuating civilians. Wooden buildings separated by inches rather than feet. Air raid shelters virtually non-existent because the government believed their construction would damage morale by suggesting Tokyo could actually be bombed. The first Pathfinder aircraft arrived over Tokyo at 0008 on March 10th. Using radar navigation, they identified the aiming point in the Shitamachi district, the most densely populated area of the city. The lead Pathfinders dropped their incendiaries in parallel lines, creating a flaming X visible from 50 miles away. Following bombers would simply aim for the burning cross, dropping their loads to expand the conflagration outward. Squadron after squadron arrived over Tokyo in a 3-hour procession. 279 B-29s reached the target area. The inferno spread exactly as operational research had predicted. Individual fires merged into area conflagration. Area conflagration escalated into firestorm. Temperatures at ground level exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Superheated air rose with such violence that it created tornado-force winds at ground level, sucking oxygen from shelters and feeding fresh air to the flames. By 2 a.m. on March 10th, 16 square miles of Tokyo were burning. Police reports described scenes of unimaginable horror. Canals boiling, asphalt streets melting, glass windows liquefying and flowing like water, metal lamp posts bending from the heat, fire department communications completely collapsed as telephone lines burned. Tail gunner Sergeant James Krantz reported that his guns were unnecessary. Japanese fighters couldn't operate in the superheated air over the city. Anti-aircraft guns fell silent as their crews fled the advancing inferno. The greatest enemy was turbulence from the thermal columns that could flip a 60-ton bomber like a leaf in a hurricane. Pilots reported they could smell burning flesh at 5,000 feet altitude. The devastation metrics exceeded all projections. 267,171 buildings eliminated. 1,008,005 people rendered homeless. Official death toll, 83,793. Actual casualties likely exceeded 100,000. More people died in 6 hours than in any single military action in human history, including the atomic bombings that would follow 5 months later. 1/4 of Tokyo ceased to exist in a single night. Japanese output statistics told the story in stark numerical terms. Aircraft engine assembly in Tokyo District reduced by 75% overnight. Precision tool operations eliminated entirely in affected areas. Electronic component fabrication, 12 major suppliers erased completely. Ball-bearing facilities, 40% of national capability eliminated. The cascade effects rippled through entire supply chains as component suppliers vanished in flames. On March 11th, reconnaissance aircraft photographed the aftermath. Where dense urban manufacturing districts had existed 48 hours earlier, only ash fields remained. 16 square miles of scorched earth punctuated by occasional concrete structures that had survived the inferno. Factory chimneys standing like grave markers over incinerated facilities. Rail yards twisted into abstract sculptures of melted steel. The psychological impact exceeded even the physical damage. Worker absenteeism skyrocketed as survivors searched for missing family members. Factory managers reported efficiency drops of 60% among traumatized workers. Military schedules became meaningless as entire supplier networks ceased to exist. The myth of the divine wind protecting Japan from foreign invasion evaporated like morning mist. Intelligence intercepts revealed growing panic in Japanese command structures. Navy Ministry reports described complete breakdown of coordination. Army procurement officers reported catastrophic disruption of component delivery schedules. Munitions Ministry statistics showed irrecoverable losses to precision capabilities. The distributed system that had protected against precision bombing proved fatally vulnerable to area incendiary attack. LeMay ordered the second wave while Tokyo still burned. On March 11th, 285 B-29s struck Nagoya, Japan's aircraft center. The Mitsubishi Aircraft Works had dispersed operations among 300 subcontractors throughout the city. The firestorm eliminated them simultaneously. 2 square miles of manufacturing district vaporized. Aircraft assembly dropped 40% in 24 hours. March 13th brought devastation to Osaka. 274 superfortresses dropped 1,733 tons of incendiaries on Japan's second-largest city. The Osaka arsenal, producing 1/5 of Japan's ammunition, ceased to exist. 8 square miles of commercial districts reduced to ash. 134,744 buildings eliminated. Port facilities that handled 30% of Japan's imports burned to the waterline. March 16th witnessed Kobe's annihilation. 331 B-29s transformed Japan's 6th-largest city into an inferno. The Kawasaki shipyards, building 1/3 of Japan's merchant vessels, burned for 3 days. The Mitsubishi and Kawanishi aircraft plants lost 60% of their capability. 7 square miles of urban area eliminated. Transportation networks that connected Western Japan to Tokyo severed completely. March 19th completed the 5-day campaign with a return to Nagoya. 290 superfortresses finished what the first raid had started. The Aichi Aircraft Company, producer of naval attack aircraft, lost every dispersed facility simultaneously. Residential districts housing skilled workers vaporized. Technical schools training aircraft mechanics incinerated. 3 additional square miles of capability removed from Japan's war economy. The statistics were irrefutable. In 10 days, B-29s had dropped 9,373 tons of incendiaries on Japanese cities. 42 square miles of urban area obliterated. 1.5 million people homeless. Output indices collapsed. Aircraft manufacturing, down 68%. Munitions assembly, down 50%. Machine tool operations, down 72%. The cascade failure of interdependent networks created economic paralysis. But LeMay was just beginning. Operation Starvation launched simultaneously with the firebombing campaign. B-29s from the 313th Bombardment Wing began dropping naval mines in Japanese waters. The ANMK-25 mine contained magnetic and acoustic sensors that made sweeping nearly impossible. 12,000 mines would eventually close every major Japanese port. Import tonnage that had already fallen 90% from submarine warfare dropped to virtually zero. Raw material shortages became critical within days. Steel required iron ore from Manchuria and Korea. No ships meant no ore. No ore meant no steel. No steel meant no weapons. Aluminum depended on bauxite from the southern resource area. Cut off completely. Aviation fuel required crude oil from the Dutch East Indies. Pipelines severed. Food imports that fed workers terminated. The economy began consuming itself. The campaign expanded relentlessly through spring. On April 13th, 327 B-29s returned to Tokyo, obliterating the Arsenal district. April 15th saw 109 superfortresses eliminate Kawasaki's engine plants. May 14th brought 472 bombers to Nagoya in the largest daylight incendiary raid of the war. The systematic erasure of Japanese capabilities proceeded with mechanical efficiency. By May 25th, even secondary cities faced annihilation. Yokohama lost 6.9 square miles and 42% of its urban area in a single night. Tokyo was struck again, with an additional 16.8 square miles incinerated. The capital city that had housed 7 million people was now 50% rubble. Output from the Tokyo-Yokohama complex, which had produced 35% of Japan's war material, effectively ceased to exist. The human toll mounted beyond comprehension. Each raid produced tens of thousands of casualties. Burn victims overwhelmed medical facilities that lacked basic supplies. Malnutrition spread as food distribution networks collapsed. Disease followed as sanitation systems failed. The skilled workers essential to precision operations, men who required years of training, died by the thousands. Their loss represented knowledge that could not be replaced. By August 1945, systematic annihilation had become routine. LeMay's target list had expanded to include every city with population exceeding 30,000. 66 Japanese cities had been firebombed, 180 square miles of urban area obliterated, 21 million Japanese displaced from their homes. The foundation that had supported the world's third-largest navy and an army of 5 million had been reduced to smoking ruins. Manufacturing statistics revealed complete economic collapse. Aircraft assembly that peaked at 2,572 planes in September 1944 fell to 1,131 by July 1945. Engine fabrication dropped 75%, propeller manufacturing down 80%. Electronic components virtually eliminated. The feedback loops accelerated geometrically. No ball bearings meant no engines. No engines meant no aircraft. No aircraft meant no defense against B-29s that arrived nightly with mechanical precision. The final statistics defied belief. Total bomb tonnage dropped, 147,000 tons. Total sorties flown, 15,000. Total B-29s lost, 414. Total American aircrew casualties, approximately 2,600. Against these losses, Japanese casualties from strategic bombing ranged from 400,000 to 600,000 dead, with millions more injured or displaced. Tokyo alone lost more civilians in one night than Britain lost in the entire war. Prince Fumimaro Konoe's post-war testimony to American investigators was explicit. Fundamentally, the thing that brought about the determination to make peace was the prolonged bombing by the B-29s. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai concurred. The B-29 was the most important single factor in causing Japan to surrender. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 without invasion, without atomic bombs, based solely on conventional bombing and blockade. The technological implications revolutionized warfare. Strategic bombing had validated itself as a war-winning capability. The ability to eliminate entire economies from the air removed the need for ground invasion. The independent air force that General Arnold had envisioned became reality in 1947, built on the foundation of B-29 success over Japan. Every subsequent air campaign would reference the lessons of 1945. American superiority had proved decisive. Boeing manufactured 3,970 B-29s between 1943 and 1946. Each aircraft cost $639,188, equivalent to $11 million in modern currency. The total program investment of $3.7 billion exceeded the Manhattan Project's $2 billion. But the return on investment was conclusive. Japan's entire foundation obliterated for the loss of 414 B-29s and 2,600 aircrew. The arithmetic of strategic warfare had been solved. The moral implications generated decades of debate. International law in 1945 did not explicitly prohibit area bombing of cities. The Hague Conventions addressed military targets, but not civilian workers. Japanese authorities had deliberately dispersed military assembly into civilian areas, making discrimination impossible. American planners argued that eliminating war capabilities justified civilian casualties. Critics condemned the deliberate targeting of population centers as war crimes. General LeMay remained unapologetic throughout his life. "We're at war with Japan. We were attacked by Japan. Do you want to kill Japanese, or would you rather have Americans killed?" His logic was coldly practical. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, projected 1 million American casualties. Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, scheduled for November 1945, anticipated 250,000 casualties in the first 30 days. Coronet, the assault on Honshu planned for March 1946, expected even higher losses. Japanese planning documents captured after surrender revealed Operation Ketsugo, the defense plan that mobilized every Japanese citizen for resistance. 28 million civilians had been organized into combat units. Bamboo spears distributed to women and children. Suicide attack training for entire populations. The National Resistance Program anticipated 20 million Japanese deaths defending the homeland. Against these projections, the bombing casualties represented a fraction of invasion costs. The transformation was irreversible. Japan's vertically integrated zaibatsu conglomerates had been shattered. The distributed system that characterized Japanese operations was obliterated. Post-war reconstruction would require complete reimagination of organizational structure. The Toyota system and just-in-time manufacturing that would revolutionize global commerce decades later emerged from the ashes of 1945's devastation. Technical innovation accelerated beyond prediction. Radar navigation that guided Pathfinder aircraft to targets through complete darkness. Incendiary chemistry that created unstoppable conflagrations. Operations research that optimized patterns. Command and control systems that coordinated hundreds of aircraft across thousands of miles. electronic warfare that jammed Japanese radar and communications. Every aspect of modern air warfare traced its origins to innovations over Japan. The psychological transformation proved equally profound. The Japanese concept of Yamato Damashi, the unconquerable Japanese spirit, had been broken by technology. The divine winds that repelled Mongol invasion fleets could not stop B-29s. The warrior tradition that valued death before dishonor meant nothing against incendiary bombs. The might that had conquered East Asia was reduced to ash in 5 months. The recognition of defeat became undeniable. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Chief of Naval General Staff, testified, "I believe the Russian participation in the war against Japan rather than the atom bombs did more to hasten the surrender." But his own staff reports contradicted this claim. Naval intelligence assessments from July 1945 stated, "The enemy's bombardment is rapidly achieving its objective of eliminating our homeland's capability. Continuation of the war has become impossible." The B-29 legacy extended far beyond World War II. Strategic Air Command's nuclear deterrent doctrine emerged directly from 21st Bomber Command experience. The assumption that air power alone could determine war outcomes shaped Cold War strategy. Vietnam, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan all witnessed attempts to replicate 1945's success. The promise and limitations of strategic bombing continue to influence military planning 8 decades later. Japanese recovery required 2 decades. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 provided crucial reconstruction demand. American occupation authorities who had overseen elimination now supervised rebuilding. The same districts incinerated in 1945 became centers of economic miracle by 1965. Toyota City rose from Nagoya's ashes. Electronics giants emerged from Tokyo's burned districts. The world's second-largest economy grew from history's most complete annihilation. Curtis LeMay was promoted to Lieutenant General 2 weeks after Japan's surrender. His subsequent command of Strategic Air Command from 1948 to 1957 shaped American nuclear strategy throughout the Cold War. The same calculated logic that determined incendiary loads over Tokyo later determined nuclear targeting of Soviet cities. Mutual assured destruction descended directly from Operation Meetinghouse's precedent. Robert McNamara, who had analyzed bombing effectiveness for LeMay, later served as Secretary of Defense during Vietnam. In his 2003 documentary, The Fog of War, he reflected on the firebombing campaign. LeMay said if we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals. And I think he's right. He, and I'd say I, were behaving as war criminals. The moral questions raised by the campaign against Japanese cities continue to resonate in debates about civilian casualties and proportionality in warfare. The last B-29 combat mission flew on August 14, 1945, hours before Emperor Hirohito announced surrender. 143 Superfortresses struck the Nippon Oil Company refinery at Tsuchizaki. As the bombers returned to base, radio operators received the ceasefire order. The strategic bombing campaign that had reduced Japanese capabilities by 70% was complete. The final equation was conclusive. 147,000 tons of bombs dropped, 66 cities obliterated, economy eliminated. In the depths of Tokyo Bay, the battleship Nagato rested on the harbour bottom, sunk by American carrier aircraft. Once the pride of the Imperial Navy, her massive guns that could hurl 3,200-pound shells 25 miles had proved worthless against bombers flying from islands 1,500 miles away. The age of the battleship had ended. The era of strategic air power had begun. Economies could be eliminated from the air. Curtis LeMay and his B-29s had proved it with calculated certainty over the burning cities of Japan. The bamboo spears distributed to Japanese civilians for homeland defense were never used. They rest today in museums, relics of a war that ended not through invasion, but through systematic aerial elimination of capabilities. The B-29 had not just obliterated Japanese facilities. It had demonstrated that modern war belonged to the nation with superior technology, assets, and the strategic logic to employ them effectively. In the ashes of 66 Japanese cities, the foundation of the modern world order was established.